All right, good morning, folks. Everything new under the sun. Here's a wrap up of really what happened yesterday, specific to the economy. We're going to take a look at a couple of articles. Here's an update, an interesting one, a very odd one. This is from ynetnews.com. White House aide now denies peace summit plan for Camp David. So I really have no idea what's going on now. I mean, the news was pretty credible and full of detail about this peace summit, and now they're denying it. Well, let's see what it says here. According to an American official, no summit has currently been planned. He said that the U.S. team on the Middle East, which is headed by Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, is at present in the region, will report back to the President and the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and National Security Council upon returning to discuss many potential next steps to expand upon the Bahrain workshop, which was the economic workshop. The official was referring to the June conference in Bahrain, and that was economic. Kushner was meeting Wednesday with Jordan's King Abdullah II in Amman, and later in the day with Netanyahu. So, interestingly, the summit was reportedly planned together with Netanyahu and his ambassador, Ron Dermer. So, who knows what is happening at this point? Based on this information, very strange that they're now coming out and denying that there is a summit at Camp David at all. So, again, very interesting. Was there fake news put out to encourage the markets upwards or something like that? Who knows? But it was basically the day before the Federal Reserve was going to make its decision on the rate cut. So what happened with the rate cut? Well, this is a Reuters article. Reuters, however you want to pronounce it. Fed cuts interest rates, signals it may not need to do more. But you'll realize that that's a confusing statement, and we're going to take a look at that, even from CNBC itself, your favorite mainstream media economic website. So they cut the interest rates by 25 basis points. Not very much. It's just kind of in between the no rate cut and really a rate cut that would signal that the Federal Reserve is really worried about the economy, which would be a 50 basis points rate cut. So 25, very safe, so as not to move the markets too far in any direction. It says the Federal Reserve cut interest rates Wednesday, but the head of the U.S. Central Bank said the move might not start a lengthy campaign to shore up the economy against risks including global weakness. Jerome Powell cited signs of global slowdown simmering U.S. trade tensions. Remember, that's what caused 1929. Ultimately, it was due to trade tariffs, trade wars that were happening prior to the 1929 collapse. It goes on, and it is a desire to boost low inflation in explaining the central bank's decision to lower borrowing costs for the first time since 2008. And also remember that Trump is all over the Federal Reserve to cut rates even more and by a significant amount. And he says this is not enough. Let me be clear, it says, it's not the beginning of a long series of rate cuts, Powell said. I didn't say it's just one rate cut. He said at the same time, I didn't say it's just one rate cut. So it's not a series of rate cuts, but it's not just one rate cut either. So very confusing. And they are confusing on purpose because they don't really want to tell the markets where they're going to go because that would cause the markets to go up or down. Financial markets have widely expected the Fed to reduce its key over rate lending rate by 1/4 of a percentage point to a target of 2 to 2.25%, but many traders expected clearer confirmation of the forthcoming cuts. So, what do the commentators on CNBC say? Powell has confused the markets about the Fed's intentions, but it is expected to cut rates again. So some key points. Powell gave markets some of what they wanted, a rate cut, and a commitment for more if necessary, but potential for further cuts was not clear enough, and the markets viewed his comments as confusing. And really, that's what the Federal Reserve always comes in and does. It always makes vague, confusing comments because it doesn't really want to spook the markets by saying they're worried about the situation. On the other hand, they don't want to cause the markets to think that everything is awesome and cause them to just start taking out more credit, etc. So basically, it's on purpose that they're very confusing, very vague, and the markets are understanding his views as vague. Stocks then sold off, and interest rates swung higher after Powell said Wednesday that the Fed was making a mid-cycle adjustment, not starting a longer-running rate-cutting cycle, forcing markets to reprice interest rate expectations. The last comment there, it was very confusing and muddled message, and I don't think that Powell delivered clear direction for what the near-term path of additional Fed easing will be. And I don't know if they ever really provide a clear path. They don't want people to know what's coming up because they don't want the markets to spike in any one direction. So what happened to the markets? Well, look at this. As we were heading up, here you can see the big drop-off. This is where the rate cut came out, and a big drop in the markets, a significant drop, and that's how the markets reacted. And so it's very confusing by everybody. It went down 333 points. This is looking specifically at the Dow Jones index. So it went down, and the markets know that a rate cut. See, the markets will go in any direction at this point. If there's a rate cut, the markets do like that. But on the other hand, if there's a significant rate cut, that means that the economy is doing really badly, so the markets might go down. So the markets could go up or down if it's a rate cut, and if it's a rate increase, the markets could also go up or down, depending on how they view what they think the Federal Reserve is trying to tell them about the actual direction of the economy. So it's interesting, and that's kind of the sum up, the wrap up of what occurred yesterday. And effectively, I think what comes out of it is that the Federal Reserve understands that the economy is in trouble. They will cut rates further, but they will be really hesitant to do so because they don't want to spook the markets. Even though the markets need a rate cut, they won't want to spook the markets. And making a rate cut also makes easier credit. And so that means corporations will go into debt more, and the Federal Reserve also does not want companies and citizens to go into debt anymore. So, because that further deepens the overall debt owing for the country, and the credit situation that the bad credit situation, the bad debt situation that the country is in, and all the people and all the businesses. And so really what the Fed would like to do is increase interest rates and limit that taking of credit, limit the spending, limit the debt. But they can't do that because that will cause the economy to crash. So right now they're just walking the line, just trying to keep the economy from crashing. I believe they're really just trying to keep it from crashing at this point. So that's kind of the sum up of where we're at. This is an interesting Zero Hedge article. We just witnessed three major developments that could lead easily to global war. And one of them is the economy, which the United States is, walking the line on. The Federal Reserve is trying not to upset the status quo. The Federal Reserve, I think, knows that the economy is in serious trouble, but they're not going to upset status quo. It has been a seemingly quiet summer in America, and indeed it has been, except for the earthquakes. In fact, it showed most Americans a blank map of the world. They couldn't even pick out Iran. So this is something that's not happening, not being represented in mainstream media. Iran, the protests in Hong Kong, North Korea shot a couple of missiles, and that's new. There is much apathy in society, and I believe that. So little knowledge about foreign affairs. If major wars erupt, none of our lives are ever going to be the same again. So the article writer is talking about this. So, new stunning development in the Middle East. So, Israel has been attacking Iranian targets in Syria. That's known. Everybody knows that. They've been striking Iranian military targets inside Syria for months. But it's changed now. In recent days, the IDF started conducting strikes in Iraq, and I just did a story about that. In an unprecedented move, Israel has expanded its attacks on Iranian targets with 2 bombing strikes on Iran-run bases in Iraq in the space of 10 days. The IAF carried out military strikes by F-35 jets. And so you can see Israel, first they were hitting back Gaza. Gaza was generally dealt with and has been quiet. Then they started attacking Syria. Syria is generally quiet now. Israel has taken out what they need to take out in Syria. Now they're expanding their range. Now they're heading over to Iraq, and they will clear out and take out bases and Iranian men and Iranian instruments of war in Iraq. Then I suggest to you what will happen is they will expand their range again to Iran and start taking out pieces of Iran. Or maybe this is all in preparation for a preemptive strike on Iran, taking out basically targets along the path to Iran, including Syria and Iraq. So it's an interesting situation here. The reason this is being called an unprecedented move is that this is the first time since 1981 where we have seen Israeli airstrikes in Iraq. So when do these sovereign countries then strike back? It says, needless to say, the latest airstrikes have absolutely enraged the Iranians, as no country is fighting back against Israel right now. And this is really, again, part of the hooks in the jaw of Russia. If Iran ultimately decides that one of the best ways to strike back is to start hitting targets inside Israel, that could spark a set-off of a major war in the Middle East. Meanwhile, something's brewing in China. So China's going back and hitting back at the political protests in Beijing. Sorry, not Beijing, Hong Kong. Political protests have made global headlines in Hong Kong in recent weeks and have greatly angered the Chinese government. So China is starting to sort of get wobbly. They were probably hoping that the protests will quickly subside and soon be forgotten, but that hasn't happened. So now China is faced with the decision. If the protests were happening elsewhere in China, they would be brutally crushed, but Hong Kong is a special case. If they act out and go militarily against Hong Kong, that might get the United States back up. The United States might back them up then at that point. If Chinese are too harsh in Hong Kong, that could turn world opinion against them. In the end, the Chinese will probably do what they always do, and that means crushing the opposition. And this could mean to intervention, like I say, by Western nations. It says the White House is monitoring what a senior administration official called a congregation of Chinese forces along Hong Kong's border. So this is an interesting buildup. What is the U.S. going to do about it? I don't think anything. I think the U.S. is going to be removed from superpower status, and that's going to come by way of economic collapse. If China is backed into a corner, they could trigger economic collapse. Start selling their U.S. dollars on the markets and start dumping them effectively. On top of everything else, the article says, as we look at the top, kind of the top three things happening in the world, North Korea just fired 2 more missiles into the ocean. They fired 2 short-range missiles early on Wednesday. The latest launchers were from Hondo Peninsula, the same area where last week's were conducted, South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff said in a statement. And so they're monitoring this. North Koreans are greatly alarmed by the joint military drills that the U.S. and South Korea will soon be conducting. Trump and Kim Jong-un have been talking, but things remain extremely tense, and it would not take very much at all for a major conflict to erupt. So wars and rumors of wars, as you can see even by this article writer, are occurring all over the place. Lots of things are happening. There's many locations on this planet that could spark World War III. The Middle East, China, North Korea, South Korea, and even economic collapse or triggering something in Alaska with bomber flyovers between U.S. and Russian bombers. So you have many things, and not the least of which I think is economic collapse, which sparks off world war. And I think that's one of the key things that's going to be coming along. And as we head into the fall period, we've got this rate cut by the Federal Reserve. We've got volatility in the markets. Like I say, heading into August 1st today, and then into the September period, which is often a very volatile time for the markets. So this is a time to watch the markets. This is a time to watch prophetic things even happening in Israel. This is a time to watch all the Jewish holidays and the significant timeline there as it relates to things happening with the fall feasts. So I'll leave it there, guys. Thanks for watching. Also, the peace plan, which is probably the biggest thing to be watching. It's apparently going to happen before Israeli elections in September 17th, I believe it was. So watch for that. Watch for news about that. So we'll keep following, guys. Thanks for watching. Look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And I think all prophetic lines are converging right now. So we'll see you guys in the next video.